Afternoon. So my name's Doug Davidson. I'm with Capgemini, and I'm going to talk to you today about GDPR. Great subject. So hoping you haven't got GDPR fatigue already. So what's changed? I'm not going to bore you senseless about GDPR. I'm kind of taking the perspective that everybody understands what GDPR is. If anybody doesn't, I'm more than happy to talk to you after this, but I think you'll get the gist. So what's GDPR in relation to the DPA? Well, it's actually quite a modernization of where the DPA started. But actually, GDPR has come about because of the digital agenda and the digital change in how we use data. And I think that's a piece that's lost on industry. It's lost in the understanding of why they need to do this. Okay? For businesses to survive in a digital economy, you have to understand that part of that digital model is the trust economy. Okay? In the early adopter phases, a lot of people lost confidence in how their data was being managed. To move this discussion forward and to move to true digital services, we have to demonstrate that we can be trusted. That's us and anybody in the supply chain that manages a citizen's data. Okay? So what's different? The definitions of personal data have changed. Whereas before DPA talked about personal data as an extant block of thing, now we're talking about individual level data. And we're not only talking about individual data that relates to the usual stuff of the name, the address, identity. We're also talking about metadata that could be attributed to the individual. So that's a massive step forward and a recognition that actually an individual isn't just the sum of the intricate part of personal information, it's the sphere of information that surrounds them that could relate back to the individual and be used equally to generate services or benefits for criminality. Okay? Responsibility and accountability to individuals is therefore a key part of undermining and underpinning that trust model. Data portability is a recognition that cloud services, digital services, and customer choice are key. Therefore, the customer has to have the ability to move all of their data to another service. Actually, if you think of it in cloud services terms, this is exactly the position that organizations will get to very, very shortly. They're not there yet. This is ahead of that piece. It's a recognition that customers can port their data to another service and not have residual asset left behind. Businesses will get to that requirement. Cloud service providers, digital service providers will have to give exactly that same assurance to businesses now. They don't currently, but they will. Okay? GDPR is a standardization of assurances around individuals' data across the whole of Europe. It's not quite strictly true. Each country has the ability to slightly tweak it. But in essence, it's a framework around European citizens. That same requirement is mandated from a geographical scope where any country operating with data from individuals from the EU has to equally be protected. And the UK government have said, regardless of Brexit, regardless of the position of our devolution away from the EU, we will absolutely align. So there is no derogation from this requirement. Okay? You have to give clear and unambiguous consent. Well, that's not quite strictly true. Anybody that really understands GDPR understands that there's a list of things that you have to assure. I would be absolutely clear on this, guys. The first thing you have to do as a business is understand your legal use. What is your legal use of that data? If you cannot come up with a definitive legal use, then you step down to the next piece. If you have a legitimate reason, what is that legitimate reason? And only then do you come down to consent. So a lot of people in the industry, there's a lot of people pushing out, you need consent management, consent management. Consent management's actually pretty low down on the list of things that you need to have to do if you're holding personal data. So UK government has legal right to hold personal data. Funnily enough, a finance company has legal right to hold your data. You've entered into a contractual arrangement. That is a legal obligation. So for the duration of that contract and any time thereafter that it pertains to that contract, they have a legal right to retain your information. Legitimate interest is where it could be used as part of a validation against that. Okay? So there's lots of reasons. But if you look across your business, there will be multiple use cases for why you hold personal data. It will not be one thing. Should not be one thing. If it's only one thing, I'd be a little bit interested, concerned. Privacy by design and default relates to how the systems and services and the reach-out processes to the individual do the security wrap from the start. We all know the old adage of 3 times the cost to build security and afterwards. Actually, it's a little bit more fundamental. You can't retrofit privacy by design into a data management system for individuals. It's virtually impossible. Individual rights. There are a plethora of individual rights. I'm sure you've seen that. I'm sure you understand that. The right to consent, the right to rectification, so on and so forth. This is a bill of activity that is coming the way of organizations. Okay? So individual citizens can now request services from you around their data at no charge. As an organization, think long and hard about how you're going to service that. So I'll give you an example. Subject access request, an individual requests a notification from you as to what data you are holding on their behalf. Okay? How much time, money, effort is it going to take in your business to meet that request? Multiply that up, then you've got a challenge. So you have to start with the end in mind. Mandatory PIAs. Well, interestingly enough, PIAs have been a mandatory requirement under DPA that people chose not to do. They would find 10 million reasons why they didn't have to do them. Okay? Be that public or private sector. We've seen many, many instances where PIAs are mandated around the holding of personal data, or PII. Okay? And it's really interesting, coming from the security side, to go into an organization and see the multiple reasons that people use not to do PIAs. Mad. It's all about watering down their perception of what the risk is to the point they don't need to manage it. Actually, if it was under my purview, I'd be a bit worried anyway. Data protection officer, I think that's a really interesting piece. It's the first time you've got an external, internal sitting between the board and the business. This is a recognition that you need somebody to act as an internal, external regulator. Not that they don't trust boards, because actually there's a mandate against the board as well, but it's a recognition that organizations holding significant holding need somebody to hold the company accountable through life, not once a year, twice a year. I said about the single set of rules. Data controllers and data processors. Data processors, so that's a really interesting piece. How many of you have worked in information security or risk management? Okay, so there's a really cool common thing out there in our world that says risk is always owned by the end customer. It's owned by the customer. It's not owned by the supplier. Okay? That the person at the top of the tree and the stack of services owns the risk. Well, actually, I'd put it a little bit differently. This is probably the first time we're seeing a clear delta between the risk ownership only residing with the end customer and now the risk management and the risk ownership sitting with the processor, the supplier. The financial penalties and sanctions are such that you couldn't possibly argue that we, the processors, don't own that risk as well. So put yourselves in that model going forward. If you're a data processor, you now own significant risk. I'm not trying to scare you, I'm just trying to lay it out in a different way to where we've been before. Data breaches, you have to respond within 72 hours. It's really interesting because that also includes the forensics ability. So you have to be able to assess the risk, categorize it, and understand what the impact is against a piece of data or data sets that have gone missing. I challenge most organizations to respond in that time frame. In fact, I would challenge most organizations to be able to do subject access requests or data breach management in line with GDPR currently. GDPR. So where to start? Ideally, we're already doing a lot of this. Ideally, this is a build on what we've been doing. But the reality is somewhat different, as I'm sure you're all aware. You have to start with a programmatic approach. If you don't start with a programmatic approach and you take a technology-led approach or a security-led approach, you're in the wrong space. This is a transformational piece across every industry that I've gone across. You have to undertake a programmatic approach across the 5 areas of business, governance, people, data, and security. If you're not touching on all of those points, and if you're only leading in one sphere, you will not meet full compliance. I think it's pretty straightforward. I've shown a classic waterfall model here, and this is as much for customers that I deal with that don't really get GDPR. They don't really understand how they're going to address it. And it's very related to models they've already got, especially within an information security or a data management model. My argument is, it isn't that much different. We assess where the problem space is under discovery. We go into remediation and we put a programmatic approach together. And then we talk about how we're going to move that forward into sustainability. The difference is we're in a digital economy. This is being driven by a digital need. So this is not a classic waterfall. And I'll give you an example. Early adopter stuff that we started to do around GDPR, we discovered that you cannot do a quick fix discovery piece. It's great for phrasing and it's great for business use case generation. It isn't any good to drive to where the problem space is. You have to invest in discovery. If somebody comes to you to offer you a 2-day discovery piece in GDPR, they're probably not the company you want to be dealing with. Okay? In the discovery space, another learning that we've got out of this is education and awareness. Customers generally across their business are not mature enough yet to understand what the context of GDPR is in relation to their current business. And when you're doing a discovery piece, be it at an auditory piece, be it at a discovery with data tools or whatever, you'll find that the people involved can't always make the leap. So we're spending more and more time doing user education and awareness up front. So I'd strongly suggest if you're in this phase with your company, start user education and awareness here. Start it as soon as possible. Try and get to a baseline understanding across your business. Sustainability. By the time we're getting through this piece here, we're already understanding more about the business. We're understanding some of the challenges they have, and we're understanding how the business operates, and I'll come to this in a minute. One of the pieces I'm advocating at this point is start your sustainability processes around gateway processes, around security build by design. Start it now so that by the time you're ending up your discovery, you've got some recommendations to take into here so that you do not generate new business services, new business attributes, artifacts, which are not GDPR compliant. We're in a digital age. We can't wait till we get all the way around here because we'll have created a whole new loop of legacy to start to work on. Start to work early on sustainability through controlled gateway processing. When you're starting your baselining piece, absolutely use the ICO. Brilliant bank of data, mimicked and copied by other countries in the EU. I know other companies in Germany are using ICO guidance. Really good collateral. Look at the 12 steps. Build that into your discovery piece. Use it as a very key indicator of hot topic areas, the 12 hot topic areas you must look at as part of your discovery phase. Does anybody want any explanation on that? Quite happy to go through it, but actually it's part of build it in, it's all published. Please go and look at it. Oh. So the baseline piece. I've got a very clear list of things, and I can come up with a massive list of things that I would absolutely build into a discovery piece. You know, does your company have a strategy? One of the key mandates, and in fact it's mandated under GDPR, and it's a non-compliance piece. If your company hasn't got a board-level statement on what it needs to do around GDPR and a strategy, they are not compliant. So even if you have a program of activity in play now, please go back and ensure that it is validated and signed off at the board level and it is minuted and actioned. Otherwise, you're not GDPR compliant. Okay? Governance structure. Ask your organization to start looking at governance now, because I can guarantee where the DPO goes in an organization is a massive bone of contention. And if the DPO sits under the CIO or the CISO, it's probably in the wrong place. A defined program we've touched on. Information stakeholders, massively important. So I'm going to talk to this piece now. The one piece that I would come to again and again, and it comes back to this, don't engage with somebody that wants to do a GDPR assessment in 2 days and tell you where you are. They're probably not the organization for you. You have to understand the data flows within your business. One of the things we discovered when we were starting to do the major cloud transformation pieces was that the data management lifecycle model is fundamentally broken in most organizations. Okay? Let it just sink in. Each part of these business processes within an overarching business, these sub-areas, processes data in relation to their core requirement of that part of the process. The challenge is there's no understanding of the overarching risk management. There's no understanding of the total ownership of data. It's processed within a compartment and then passed somewhere else. This leads, and we see this again and again, it leads to local data being taken from structured data and stored locally as unstructured data as a local copy. Actually, it's mimicking the risk again and again and again. We equally see different understandings in every organization we've assessed thus far about the data retention periods. Fantastic figures of variance. Now, that's caused by user not having a fully fledged understanding of the assurance model of the organization, or an understanding of the types of data, or an understanding of what it really means. So we'll get fantastic figures of 30 days to 100 years, depending on the organization. Actually, the 100 years could relate to the storage over here for the central storage of data to meet a legal compliance requirement. But in the business process, aligned to GDPR, there is no need to store the data for any other period than the time it's used for the process. So you will find that there's a requirement to store data within the process that could either be built up to an overarching level or could be distilled down. If we distill it down, it reduces your risk. So it may suit your purposes for initial compliance to understand the life of data within an overarching service, and in next year, start to break that down again to reduce your risk, greater granularity, greater understanding. We've got services that are in-house, but we've also got services that are out in third parties. Third-party suppliers are a massive Achilles heel. Okay? Not because they're not doing the right things, but they are no longer aligned to GDPR because they never were. So we see data moving in and out. We see different ICT systems. So we try to high-level this. Oh, this is an Office 365 system within Azure cloud. Sub-supplier over here is sitting on a completely different architectural stack. So how are you going to make sure that they've got exactly the same security controls? You've got to take all of this into account. You've got to understand the data processing, the interactions between you and your sub-providers, so your secondary providers and their tertiary providers, because it's your data. Okay? Once you've got an understanding of that piece there, you can pretty much then start to move into remediation. So you've got to build up a knowledge base around what this organization does and how it does it. Actually, I think I'd put it a different way as well. A lot of organizations will start to think twice about how they're actually processing data. Why would you spend thousands and thousands of pounds assuring the existing data service when you could move the data service and take that risk out? Or move the data repositories to a centralized piece, or move the data repositories away from third parties and put it behind a portal system. So there's a lot of thinking at the remediation stage. And I'm being perfectly honest, I don't see all of these challenges being addressed by May. I absolutely do not. Organizations do not have the funding, the resource, the capability to completely transform their organization by the 20th of May next year. They don't have it. So there has to be a realistic approach or a phased approach that gets them as near that point and then helps them in the next year again to refine that model. I'd equally put this a different way. This is no different to any other compliance regimen that we've ever had to deal with. Let me sink that in a bit. It is no different. The reason we're drilling into this in this manner with customers is to help them. But compliance in itself, in and of itself, will not help you as a business to be fully compliant. This exercise is to help you to get to the best possible position. Actually, you should inculcate this into your overarching governance and regulatory compliance models. That is where you will see the most benefit. If you don't, all you're doing is a tick box exercise, a much bigger, much more painful, but nonetheless tick box exercise. Out of this piece, once you have built up an understanding, you absolutely have to build in education and awareness from the start, but you have to mature that so that you start to get to roles-based education. What are you trying to get the users to do within your business processes, and what level of understanding do they need of GDPR, the compliance requirements that they must carry out in relation to their role? By this point, you would be looking to have implemented or be implementing a DPO and governance structure and the supporting elements. One person is not going to make a difference. One person with a structure that's federated across the organization to look at local business units and take ownership of guidance and control around those areas, almost data guardians, data stewards, principal users within that area who are GDPR specialists. They're the ones that are going to federate out the knowledge and the support. Third-party compliance we talked about before. It starts with contractual position. It starts with understanding what the customer's got by way of current contractual commits, and have they asked the third parties to undertake this piece. That's not going to be a quick fix, but you have to sit down with your suppliers and gauge their maturity as quickly as possible. The Achilles heel of many organizations and of many breaches in the past has come through the third-party supplier infrastructure. In this piece, you need to bring them close to you as quickly as possible. You need to make a guidance call as to their maturity around your risk. And it's not a case of do you stop them doing, but what could you do to put wrap arms around them to help them deliver for you? Okay? You've got to build a data handling model. If it's one exam question the ICO are absolutely going to ask is, where is your data? How are you managing it? Who has access to it? Et cetera, et cetera. Build a DHM, red, amber, green it in relation to the bits that are concerned to you so you can prioritize against the pieces that need addressed. But that's a central asset you need to build up now. It's amazing how many organizations don't have that, even if they're supposed to have it. Okay? And then put that into a data management lifecycle. One of the other pieces around any personal information or any asset is, are you retaining it beyond its needs? Why are you retaining it? One of the old pieces we used to find under DPA was that people didn't ever delete data. So look again at the data lifecycle around the data you've got. Breach management. Bring in third parties. Bring in a supplier network that can support you with the forensics capability as and when you need it. Set up crisis management teams. Don't have one team that do business continuity management. Have a crisis management team that can pull in specialists that can help you get there quicker, smarter. Consent rights management. It's really interesting. I see a lot of press about consent management systems in the market that you can buy, and I've got no axe to grind against them. My own thoughts, I'd rather do it in a manual way to understand it first and foremost, and to understand how it relates to my business, and to gauge what the impacts are against my business. I might have to put a bit more money and effort around it, to then be able to define how to address that as a business challenge going forward. I don't think any one technology is going to address that. And in fact, I don't think any one technology is going to address GDPR. Again, it's a combination of tooling, process, capability, specialists. That's going to be the Achilles heel. And then sustainability. I've touched on this before. Even when we get the systems to a point of compliance, okay, we have to make that sustainable. And to make it sustainable, I'll come back just to one piece. It has to be inculcated and integrated into the cultural approach of the business. It is now baseline. It is part of how we do business. Okay? So I hope you've enjoyed that ultra-fast run through GDPR. If anybody's got any questions,